It would be an understatement to say that War Thunder has some problems. A lot of them have been around for a long time, but one issue that is becoming increasingly prevalent is feature creep. Feature creep, also known sometimes as scope creep, occurs when so many things are tacked onto a project that it starts to harm it. It's a very easy trap to fall into as a developer. You start out with a relatively simple goal, then you think it would be cool to add another feature, to make your project even better. Then, to complement the feature you just added, you add another one, and then another, and another. Things cascade out of control, to the point that most features are half finished, or the project as a whole lacks focus. You've probably seen it happen before, especially if you follow a lot of early access or indie games. A great example of this problem is Star Citizen. It was always an incredibly ambitious game, but once they received a lot more money than they expected, they began massively increasing the scope of their game. As their funding continued to grow, so did their roadmap. The single-player campaign, Squadron 42, was supposed to release around 7 years ago, back in 2014. Since then, they've stopped giving possible release dates. The main game is still technically in alpha, though it's in a relatively playable state. In the case of Star Citizen, feature creep is caused by two main things: an overly ambitious studio lead, and pressure from the fanbase. A lot of players who backed the project have left, but those that remain are extremely loyal, and actually don't mind the feature creep. To them, if it means the game is truly as expansive as promised, they don't care if they have to wait longer. Which brings me to a point. Feature creep isn't necessarily a bad thing, as long as it doesn't hurt the project or its promises. If the developer can actually deliver, then more power to them. Unfortunately for War Thunder, it's definitely reached a point where it's detrimental. I don't really blame Gaijin though. There's not much they can do to avoid it. Unlike games with conventional business models, War Thunder depends on new features and content to stay afloat. Free-to-play games are sort of like episodic content. In order to hold attention and make money, they need to release new content regularly. You would think that simply adding new vehicles would be enough, but as vehicles become more modern, more features have to be added in order to model them accurately. Stuff like new ammo types, active protection systems, commander overrides, etc. The player base deserves some blame for this as well. How often do you see people begging for features that would be useless, or have very little impact on the game, but would require a lot of work to be put in? A lot of these are for the sake of realism, which I don't agree with, given that realism does not equal quality or enjoyment. Volumetric shells, for example, have probably caused more harm than good. Sure, it buffed a few tanks that needed it, but it also dragged down the overall experience. Despite being around a year old now, the mechanics still has a ton of issues, and that's the main problem with feature creep in War Thunder. When new mechanics are introduced, it's in a barely functional state, and either see fixes in piecemeal or are never fixed at all. To see feature creep at full tilt, look at War Thunder's game modes, specifically naval and helicopter battles. By adding these game modes, Gaijin drastically increased the number of vehicles they could add, and especially the number of premiums they could sell. Fans of these vehicle types were obviously very happy to see them in game, but gradually became disappointed, as they realized these game modes had little to no substance. Helicopters are mostly used in tank battles, because their own game mode is very boring and dominated by one helicopter, the Ka-50. Naval battles are a bit more fleshed out, but receive little attention or nuance in the balancing department. Tanks probably receive the most attention, but they also receive a lot of mechanics that no one asked for. It could just be my memory, but I don't remember people asking for commander overrides. Yet they were added anyway. It functions as intended, but it doesn't mean it's good for the game, at least with how it performs now. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I don't think the commander should be able to take over instantly. There should probably be a short delay. But I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about it. I think it's kinda dumb when people see something like new sounds and say, well, they could be spending that time fixing other things. I doubt the sound guy knows how to fix ghost shells or whatever. But when new vehicle mechanics are being introduced in spite of many others being broken, it kind of does apply. Despite technically being released, War Thunder does function like a beta, especially since changes aren't really tested first. They're pushed straight to the live server. There's nothing wrong with having players help with QA, public betas happen all the time, but it shouldn't be done on the game's live servers. As I said earlier, there's not much that can be done about it. Free-to-play games are especially vulnerable to feature creep, so this video is less of a how can this be fixed, and more of a here's why things are the way that they are type deal. Anyway, I hope it was informative, and I'll see you on the next one.